All right, so previous video, 2 people left some comments that got me thinking a little bit about some things more deeply than I had prior about it. And I like when that happens. So the comments consisted of, the first one was the average 20-year-old. A 20-year-old has more to lose than a 60-year-old. And then the comment replying to that one said, well, actually the 60-year-old in many ways, in many respects, has far more to lose because he has spent more time being alive and he's accumulated far more things that he is holding to very high regard. He values a great deal. He has things that are in his possession that he values a lot. And because he's been alive for a long time. So relationships with people, he's built upon these things for over years and years of time. And he's far more invested. The 60-year-old is far more invested in life than the average, 20-year-old is. The reason as to why I feel the 20-year-old might have more, the 20-year-old has more to lose in an abstract sense, because in the future, it's in the form of potential, it's in the form of time, future time laid out in front of them. Possibility, potential, they have far more potential. Whereas the 60-year-old, much of what he values, much of what he's going to value, it's already at hand. He's already in possession of much of what he is going to ever value in his life. And he's going to have a far more easier time in recognizing that he stands to lose far more. The 60-year-old is going to be far more easily able to recognize his own mortality. He's going to have had, odds are, significant brushes against his own mortality. The fact that he is going to die, whereas the 20-year-old isn't going to be able to recognize anywhere near as clearly, at least the average 20-year-old. I know I'm 25, and I don't believe I'm going to die. I don't believe I'm actually going to die. Not really. I've never really felt strongly that I'm going to die one day. It doesn't feel real. It's an abstraction in the future. I don't feel as though this body is going to rot in the ground one day. I don't believe that. I'm a death conspiracist. Well, I believe that other people die. I've seen that happen. But me, I'm never going to die. I'm immortal. I'm the one person that's just never going to die, ever. Never going to grow old. I don't have to worry about any of that. I'm a vampire. At least that's what I feel. Most of the time, like the large majority of the time, I'm in possession of these psychological repressions, so I don't recognize the fact that I'm going to die. Whereas the 60-year-old is going to be far more easily able to recognize his own mortality. He's going to have a far easier time in recognizing all that he has to lose. And the 20-year-old, the things that he's going to value in his life, it's in the future. It's way out. Again, it's in this abstract. And even the things, the 20-year-old, even the things that he does hold to really, he values so strongly, he isn't able to recognize anywhere near as clearly. Say relationships, like loved ones. So these things that the 20-year-old is the things that he is in possession of, that he does value a great deal, he's not going to be able to recognize anywhere near the degree at which he values them. That's going to require certain things to happen in their lives, like deaths of people that you care about. It's the case in general, not just when you're young, but we don't value people until they're gone. That's just, but you're gonna find that to be the case to, again, just ridiculous degrees when you're young. Like siblings, like parents. Whereas as you age, you'll have an easier time in recognizing, even before they eventually die. So the 20-year-old, much of what he values, the things that he does value in the present, The 20-year-old is going to have a far more difficult time in recognizing the degrees at which, to the extent that that values them. And the 60-year-old, I'm a little red because I'm getting worked up. It's hard to think when you're high. It's hard to follow the words, but that's the summary. Well, what was the summary? The 60-year-old is going to have. Maybe the 60-year-old isn't going to have far more to lose, but he's going to have a far easier time in recognizing all that he has to lose. On average. A far easier time. Whereas the 20-year-old, much of what he values in the present, he's going to have a very difficult time in recognizing the degrees at which he values them. And much of what he's going to value in the future, there's even less of a grasp on that. Because again, it's in the abstract. It doesn't feel real. The future, it's very difficult. Even when we spend lots of time contemplating the future, even when we attempt to spend lots of time sitting with the fact that there is going to be a future for us. We're going to die. Life is very short. Time is very short. The things that we value are far more valuable than we recognize them to be when we're young. These things, even if you spend significant portions of time sitting with them, it's still, there's so much limitation there. There's so much limitation. But it's better than nothing. It's, we should, especially when you're young, you should sit with that more often and try to digest that the best you can. Even if it is going to come with some very, very steep limitations, regardless of how much time you spend doing it, it's still a hell of a lot better than living your life in perpetual distraction and forgetting all the things that are in your possession until they are stripped from you. And that reminder can be very valuable. And moments like, where I've been laying on this couch for like the past week doing nothing, recovering from this surgery, and that's given me a lot of time to think. And one of the most comforting, one of the most reassuring, soothing things that a person can be in possession of is that there exists something in the future that's going to compensate for this present suffering, the present discomfort. And there really isn't, I don't think there's any greater coping mechanism than that. That's the most powerful fucking, if you can convince yourself of that, and that can be a difficult thing to convince yourself of for many people, it's not but that's something worth attempting to sell yourself on, if you can. If you can convince yourself that there are things that are worth striving for, like worth striving towards, that's the most valuable, sustaining force. It's true. That's one of those cliche fucking things you hear all the time, but it's true. It's true. It's fucking true. If you can convince yourself of that, you can endure, I don't want to say anything, but you can certainly stomach, you can certainly swallow far more shit than you believe that you can. And it really does nullify, to very real degrees, the suffering, the pain. It does. And there are arguments to be made that that's delusion, that is just a very, very soothing, comforting lie. Because eventually, and that's also where the denial of death comes in too. This idea that you can cultivate things, you can spend lots and lots of your time, energy, effort here, building upon things, and then once you cease to be, once you die, once this body, this vessel rots in the fucking ground, you'll somehow persist beyond your death. And again, yeah, you might argue that's delusional, but there is no greater comforting delusion than that. And I don't know what percentage of the human population have children intentionally, deliberately, but I think that's one of the most justifiable reasons. The reason as to I'm able to wrap my head around it. Again, when you're young, you fail to recognize just how driven you are by this particular ambition of leaving behind something that'll persist beyond your death. And many would argue, yeah, of course, you should do that in a different form. You should leave behind. There are so many other ways in which one can vicariously persist beyond death outside of creating a biological extension of yourself. And that's true. I mean, there are ways but that's quite a difficult thing to source for many people. And again, I don't know what percentage of people have children intentionally, but intentionally, let alone thoughtfully, whatever that even means. But someone's given a lot of thought to the decision prior to actually carrying out that action. How many people is it anywhere near a conscious choice to have a child? How often is it even close to being a conscious thing that is thought out? That's an important question to attempt to answer, and I would argue that, yeah, that's the minority of human beings who create human beings. And then you get into religious belief and how many people genuinely feel as though creating a person is something that God wants of them desperately, so that's why they have to do it. How many people use that as a sort of excuse, or how many people use that as a legitimate, that's what they believe to be true within I'm high as fuck. Anyways, the average 20-year-old, right? So the average 20-year-old is going to have far more to lose in the abstract. The future is the place to be for the 20-year-old. He stands to lose a lot, but it's in the form of potential. It doesn't, but whereas the 60-year-old, what he stands to lose, not only is it closer at hand, it's in his possession already, it's more tangible, but also many of the things that he does hold in very high, he values a great deal, they're going to exist externally, outside of himself. A lot of these things are going to exist outside of himself, things that he's built upon that will persist beyond his death. Again, how many, I don't know, like what percentage of 60-year-olds, what percentage of 20, like this applies to, but I think that a lot, that helps though, thinking about these things when you're young, because the future is the place to be. It's coming. And again, you combine these things. You combine one of them being the terrors of death, your fear of death, your aversion to death. You have to factor that in when considering what it is that you stand to lose here and what sort of value you are placing on your life. Because odds are you value these things far more than you realize you do when you're young. Self-preservation, for example. You value self-preservation far more than you recognize that you do. Certainly relative to the 60-year-old or the 70, 80, if you're knocking on death's door, you're gonna have a far easier time in recognizing your aversion to death. Just how terrified you are of that eventual, inevitable consequence of having been created, fucking being a human being. That's the video. So the summary is the 20-year-old, the thing that he is valuing, well, he's not valuing it consciously. Again, it lies dormant. Much of what he values, he's not able to really grasp it as well. I'm saying he, but again, this applies to me very heavily. Much of what I value, I fail in recognizing anywhere near the extent at which I value it. And it takes some pretty significant things to happen in a person's life, especially when they're young, to get them to have a far more accurate appreciation for the degrees at which they value the things, like their relationships with human beings that they care about, for example. My throat's really dry. And yeah.